morning. Our scripture this morning is some verses from chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, it does not put on airs, and it is not snobbish. It is never rude or self-seeking. It is not prone to anger, nor does it brood over injuries. Love doesn't rejoice in what is wrong, but rejoices in the truth. There is no limit to love's forbearance, to its trust, its hope, its power to endure. Love never fails. Prophecies will cease, tongues will be silent, knowledge will pass away. There are, in the end, three things that last: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Ancient words from our tradition.
If you clicked on to your e-news this morning, and I'm sure all of you do, when I clicked on this morning, I got this pop-up picture of Dr. Jim Taylor, his lovely smiling face, who will be gracing us with his presence for our sermon time. And we give thanks for his being here this morning. And I also have to include Marianne. Jim and Marianne are both faithful stewards of our church. They were wonderful coordinators for our early service and dedicated to that ministry. Jim serves as an elder on our session in admin and personnel, and they both attend classes and have been with us for many years. So we give thanks today for both of them and a blessing to you all.
Thank you, Donna. I would ask, while I'm speaking this morning, if you would keep that remarkable scripture in your heart and mind as I'll be returning to it at the close this morning. Now, if you've been around St. Andrews for some period of time, you may recall that a number of years ago, Jim Rigby did a sermon series on the Wizard of Oz. And I've been thinking recently that it was time for us to return to the wizarding world. And that's what we're going to do this morning in terms of the gospel according to Harry Potter. Now, I probably need to provide a little context for why in the world am I doing that? What personal interest do I have in Harry Potter? And why would that matter to St. Andrews and to you? So let me provide just a little bit of context. Marianne and I are blessed to have two granddaughters, Sarah and Kate, both of whom were at the perfect age to read the Harry Potter books as they were being written and published. And you know how it is with grandparents. Whatever your grandkids are doing, then you're going to do the same as a grandparent. Now, Sarah, the more ardent reader of the two at the time, with her tendency when a book came out, and you know they were big, thick tomes, she would take the book and read it from cover to cover straight through without stopping. And her complaint was that her arms got tired doing that. So Marianne and I are both very bright, and we decided that's a no-no for us. So what we did is we listened to the audiobooks read by Jim Dale, and if you ever heard anything that Jim has read, he's beautiful with voices, and it was a great way to make our way through Harry Potter. Now, that's my personal interest, but I also have a professional interest in Harry Potter. I was an educator for 40 years, and for a significant part of that time, I was the dean of a College of Arts and Humanities at a very conservative Southern Baptist university. When I say conservative, I mean primarily the upper administration and the board of trustees that had a number of conservative Southern Baptist pastors sitting on the board and who took great fun in attacking Harry Potter from the pulpit as being sort of an evil influence on our lives. But I should also say that the faculty at my university was less than 20% Baptist, and the student body looked very much demographically and religiously like the city. So there was sort of a divergence between most of the school and the upper administration and trustees. Well, as you might imagine, my literature faculty came to me with what I could see right away was going to be a controversial idea. They said, what we need to do is bring Harry onto campus because we know that so many kids are reading this as they're going through their teenage years, and we're now beginning to get that generation on campus. This would be a great teaching tool. We can use units from Harry Potter to help us access other literature as well. Be a great entree. Well, I agreed with that, but that then led me to several meetings with the president, who wanted to know why we were bringing Harry onto campus, given our conservative board of trustees. In fact, he said, why Harry Potter when we have the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis? Now, you know C.S. Lewis, the Anglican theologian, longtime faculty member at Oxford and Cambridge, great writers, same 7-book type series. But I argued with the president that Harry Potter was an easier read, and then I found an argument that actually resonated with him. I said that the metaphors for good and evil in the Harry Potter books are much more compelling than those you find in the Chronicles of Narnia, and we'll be able to deal with that more effectively. Therefore, it's a better, easier teaching tool. And I added, all of the Harry Potter books are chock full of teenage angst. And what's more fun to deal with freshmen and sophomores than teenage angst, because they are in the latter stages of it and can really identify with it. So you see, I have both a personal and a professional interest in Harry Potter. Now, why is this of any relevance to you and to St. Andrews? Well, I have news for you. I firmly believe that Jim Rigby has 2 alter egos in Harry Potter. In the first case, he is clearly Albus Dumbledore, who is the headmaster, mentor, and father figure for Harry. And then the surprising one, I think the other alter ego for Jim is Harry himself. And I'll come back to that in just a few minutes. But more than that, the Harry Potter books are chock full of principles that could have come straight from the mouth of Jim Rigby. And I'm going to talk about 2 of those this morning and see if you agree with me. The first has to do, and I should warn you, in this first one, this sort of normal countenance that I have now will become quite preachy. So be prepared for that. I will tell you when it's going to happen. The first of the 2 principles is how we make choices. Now think about Harry for a minute. If you don't know the books, I think I can give you an adequate explanation. Harry is a child looking for an identity, that his parents were killed when he was an infant, and he was brought up by an aunt and uncle who frankly weren't very good at it and didn't care very much for Harry. And so by the time he gets to Hogwarts, he's still in a search for who he is, and he's beginning to see that he has abilities that are shared with the antagonist in the series, he who shall not be named, the Dark Lord, Lord Voldemort. That the Lord and Harry can do some of the same things, including talking to snakes. Now, that's not a very veiled metaphor. I believe that's called Parseltongue in Harry Potter. So he's got all these shared traits with the Dark Lord. By the time we get to book 2, The Chamber of Secrets, Harry is really worried now that he's becoming more and more like Voldemort. And so he meets with Dumbledore, his mentor and father figure, and they talk about this. And Dumbledore says something to him that is critically important. He says, Harry, it's not our abilities that determine who we are, it is our choices. And that's what Hogwarts was all about, trying to provide the young witches and wizards with a basis for life, for having criteria by which they could make decisions. Now here comes preaching. I would argue with you that that is the principle, the primary purpose of public education. That public education should provide our children with the necessary tools to evaluate information and draw conclusions. We're talking, of course, about critical thinking. It could be identified as rational thinking or constructive thinking or reflective thinking. I don't care the terminology you use, but that's what public education at its foundation should be all about. Now, unfortunately, I stand before you this morning in many ways a failed educator regarding this, because when I left the field after 40 years, I know full well that I left the field in worse condition than I found it. But I don't think I'm the principal evil one here. I don't think I bear much personal responsibility for that failure. I'm going to place it on someone else, and I really get preachy now. I'm going to give you a name who I think is primarily responsible for the failure of public education in the time in which we live, and it's a name you probably haven't heard in a while. Jerry Falwell Sr. Now here's why I'm saying that. Here's a man who was the pastor of Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia, the founder of the Moral Majority, and the founding president of Liberty University. And here's what he said to evangelical Christians. He said, forget about who we elect president of the country. Forget about Congress. Forget about state houses. Instead, let's focus all of our effort on electing our people to local school boards. And that's exactly what he, now gone, and his followers have been doing for the last 50 years, particularly in the South. And if you look at southern states, Texas is a great example, you see where we are. We're struggling with textbook selection, with what can and can't be taught in the classroom, who's hired to teach. And the greatest tragedy of all is those teachers who are best equipped to teach critical thinking are the very ones who are leaving the profession in droves because they cannot stand the working conditions that confront them. So we have a real tragedy in public education, and I place the blame for that on Jerry Falwell and those who followed him. Now, I told you Jim Rigby was Harry Potter in a special way, and that's related to this first principle of how we make choices. Think of Jim any Sunday that he's preaching here at St. Andrews. At some point in the sermon, he will say, you know, when I was in elementary school, or when I was in high school, or, you know, when I was an undergraduate, or I was in seminary, or I was in Sunday school, people are always making these statements as though they are fact. They are offering principles, and I'm not comfortable with that. Jim was a searcher or an inquirer throughout the educational process. Tell me why. Why should we believe this? Give me a chain of evidence that supports this. That's who Jim is in terms of how he deals with information. And in that way, he's just like Harry Potter. Harry Potter does the same thing throughout the 7 books in the series. So that's the first principle, then, how we make choices. And I'm glad to say that Jim does a great job of helping us with those criteria almost every Sunday. Now, the second principle is the one that I think most defines Jim Rigby, and you will recognize it right away, and that's the principle of love. And I'm going to have to tell you more about Harry Potter here than some of you may want to know. By the time we get to book 7, Harry is convinced that in order to weaken the Dark Lord, he himself, Harry Potter, is going to have to die. And so he's on his way into the Forbidden Forest for what Harry believes will be the final confrontation with the Dark Lord. And at the very moment of what he thinks is going to be his death, he is suddenly transported into an entirely different scene. He finds himself in the presence once again of Albus Dumbledore, seemingly impossible since Dumbledore died in the previous book. But here they are together once again talking, and they cover a wide range of subjects, and they end with the power of magic. And Dumbledore makes a great insight here. He sticks his hand on Harry's chest and he says, "But Harry, the most powerful magic resides in here." And Harry's confused. He doesn't understand what that means. And Dumbledore says, "It's the power of love. It is by far and away the most powerful magic." And he puts that in very concrete terms. He says to Harry that love is more powerful than the Elder Wand, which is the most powerful wand, more powerful than the invisibility cloak, which allows you to conceal yourself from your enemies. It's even more powerful than the resurrection stone, which allows you to see and communicate with the dead. Now, I want you to contrast what Dumbledore is saying about the power of love with the words of the Dark Lord, and see if this doesn't describe exactly what we're confronting in our society today. For the Dark Lord says, "There is no good or evil, only power, and those too weak to search for it." Now that describes what we have today in terms of love on one side and power on the other. It's a great divide that's really difficult to cross. In fact, I would say there are almost no bridges, except maybe for those that Jim Rigby is trying to erect. It's a difficult task. Jim is eternally the optimist. How many times have you heard him say, "I think we're at the point where people on both sides of this chasm will say, enough is enough. We have to find a way to communicate with each other from a spirit of love." Now, whether we get there or not, I'm trailing along behind Jim trying to find out. So we have these two principles that are overriding in Harry Potter. How we make choices, the principle of love. And I should probably go back and retitle what I talked about this morning. Rather than the Gospel according to Harry Potter, maybe it should have been the Gospel according to Harry Potter and Jim Rigby. So what I would like to do then is to close, as we began, as sort of an encomium, a speech of praise to Jim Rigby. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, it does not put on airs, it is not snobbish, it is never rude or self-seeking, love is not prone to anger, nor does it brood over injuries. Love doesn't rejoice in what is wrong, but rejoices in the truth. There is no limit to love's forbearance, to its trust, its hope, its power to endure. Love never fails. Prophecies will cease, tongues will be silent, knowledge will pass away. There are in the end three things that last: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I invite you now to your own reflection upon these words.